Welcome back to Memos to the President. I'm Ili with the Special Competitive Studies Project. I'm here with my colleague, Chip. Chip, welcome.
Thank you.
The purpose of having you today on the podcast is we're releasing another memo to the President. This one is related to the reform that the intelligence community should undertake under the new leadership. But before we talk about the memo, I would like for our viewers and listeners to really get to know who Chip is and how he got here.
Oh, terrific. It's really great to be here with you this morning, Ili, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about our memo, which should be coming out here in the next couple of days. You asked about how I got my start. I graduated from Duke University, the finest university in North Carolina. And while I was there, I had an interview with several places, including the Central Intelligence Agency. It was a great conversation. They told me that CI is a place where you could apply what you've learned on international affairs, national security, and inform important decision makers and have access to the best information, the most wonderful colleagues. And so I took the opportunity and joined in early 1990s to an office called Resources, Trade, and Technology. I was an energy analyst. I have no idea why they hired me as an energy analyst. I had a little bit of background, but not much.
Right.
So I did that for a couple of years, but pretty quickly transferred over to work on East Asia. So I spent the first half of my career focused on East Asia, trade policies, foreign security issues. And the midpoint of my career, after doing a stint on our 7th floor, being an executive assistant to one of our senior leaders, I pivoted over to the Near East. This was at a time, the height of our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the second half of my career was almost entirely devoted to the Near East. So, I had a really varied career, most of it focused on analysis, and then a couple of years ago, I decided to retire and join SCSP.
Incredible career, Chip. I know you're one of the top analysts we've had at CIA, so I know, the insights you have about a particular region are tremendous, and we might get into that as well during the course of the podcast. But the purpose, really, as I said at the beginning of the show, is to talk about the memo. So tell me, in a nutshell, what is the main message of the memo?
So, we have an absolutely incredible intelligence community. It does amazing things for the country, much of which is hidden from public view, but they are at the forefront, at the vanguard of our nation's security. But we're at an incredible moment of change. I call it a generational moment for the intelligence community for really two factors. One is we're facing a peer competitor, called a pacing competitor in the People's Republic of China, that is posing kind of unprecedented levels of challenges militarily, politically, socially, economically to the United States. And they're cooperating to an unprecedented degree with other members of the so-called axis of disruptors. Think about what we're seeing in the news today about how they're cooperating with Russia, with Iran, with North Korea. It's really unprecedented. And united, these axis of disruptors present an enormous geostrategic challenge that our country really hasn't faced in this big of a way since the Second World War. The other big factor is technology. And here at SCSP, we talk a lot about this, so I won't belabor it. But obviously, artificial intelligence is going to transform not just our economy, but the global economic order and how our societies and our democracies operate. There are other really pivotal technologies that will matter, not just for intelligence, but for our economy and our nation's security. Things like quantum, biotech, advanced networks, chips, right? And our intelligence community still today, in its DNA, in its very structure and its authorities and how it's organized, was built in 1947 with the National Security Act.
Yeah.
And it underwent a significant refresh after the 9/11 attacks with the 2004 Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. But essentially, it's organized the same as it has been for the last 75 years or so. And I think the moment has come where this kind of unprecedented level of geostrategic challenge and the pace and the importance of gaining technical advantage is going to drive, needs to force the IC to drive itself to change. And so we've got a set of recommendations that we think kind of capture this moment and if implemented would set us on our way to succeeding over the long term.
The notion about intelligence reform has been around for a long time. almost every year you read a report, Congress tasks another report or a study. Why do you think we should do it now, and why this is the time to make a difference?
Because the intelligence community is already falling behind, particularly on its implementation and its orientation on some of these key technologies. Look, if you're the President of the United States today and you were to ask, what is China developing with its AI? Or what's coming next in their chip development? Do you think they're going to get the best answer from the intelligence community, or are they going to get it from OpenAI or some company?
Right.
And the reality is that so much of that know-how and that understanding is residing now outside the IC, and the IC needs to catch up in its ability to deal with technology, in the words of John Ratcliffe in his confirmation hearing the other day, both as a target and as a tool. So that's the level of urgency, and of course the pressure that we're getting from China and the access of disruptors really adds to the urgency in our view.
Right. And without including the private sector information, it feels like you're only dealing with a piece of the total, picture that you have to work on or deal or analyze, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
The intelligence community, as I said at the outset, is an incredible institution. It has 3 core missions. It collects foreign intelligence, it produces all source analysis, and at the direction of the president, implements covert action. Those are the missions. A lot of what we do is focused on secrets,
Right.
collecting them,
Right.
preserving them. But the purpose of intelligence, the reason that we have it, is for insight, for decision advantage. That's why we've created this enormous community.
Right.
And if you're a policymaker interested in understanding what the competitive landscape in advanced networks is, it matters to you whether that information is collected by NSA through intercepted communications or a CIA spy. But it's the insight that matters. That's what you want first and foremost.
Right.
And the IC needs to adapt and adjust and evolve in order to deliver those insights.
Right. Let's go back to the memo
Yeah.
you authored. What are some of the, if you can summarize your key recommendations?
Yeah, we have 5 key recommendations. The first is I've already talked a little bit about, the intelligence community really needs to elevate the analysis and collection of what we dubbed techno-economic intelligence. Right. This is the entire realm of what foreign adversaries and competitors are developing on some of these key emerging technologies such as AI, and how their economies are being structured and oriented to compete. That's issue number 1. The second is it needs to put more of an emphasis and find a new institutional home for open source intelligence. This is absolutely vital for 2 reasons. One is, you've alluded to, it's a critical source of information these days. Secondly, it's absolutely key if the intelligence community itself is going to leverage artificial intelligence in its own operations and analysis. And it's de-emphasized right now. If you're in the IC, particularly in any of the collection realms, the sexy work is doing spying, doing eavesdropping. It's not open source intelligence, and it deserves a seat at the table and its own institution within the IC. The third area is in terms of the intelligence community's relationships, both domestically and abroad. And what do I mean by that? There needs to be a more open and kind of bilateral sharing relationship with our private sector, our companies, our research labs, our academic institutions, to help the IC understand the world of emerging tech. That's one. The other is foreign relationships. Again, a holdover from the Second World War and the Cold War. The sine qua non of intelligence liaison relationships are what we call the 5 partners.
Right.
United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Undoubtedly very close partners and will remain so. But there are some new relationships that we argue will matter more in the future. Think about other countries, particularly in East Asia, Japan, South Korea, India,
Right.
that are sources of technological innovation, information, and they share a common concern about the threat from the People's Republic and other places. In the Near East, right, Israel is a fantastic partner for us in all sorts of ways, including at the forefront of employing AI and advanced technologies. And they are slowly beginning to establish warmer relations with some of their Arab neighbors. And technology and the intelligence community should be at the forefront of enabling that.
Right.
All right. So that's another area. The fourth is, we're under a lot of pressure from China, from Russia, from Iran, in what they call hybrid warfare. This is the gray zone of below the threshold of all-out war, but think of intellectual property theft, cyber attacks,
right.
ransomware attacks. We were galvanized as a nation after the 9/11 attacks killed 3,000 of our fellow citizens. The next attack of significance could be an economic 9/11. I mean, what if the New York Stock Exchange were taken down, or the Colonial Pipeline disruption that occurred a few years ago
right.
were done at a larger scale? The intelligence community shouldn't decide when and where covert action should occur, but it needs to inform the president and provide the capabilities and the options if and when the president decides that it's time to push back against those things. And finally, our last recommendation has to do with the IC workforce.
Yep.
Again, Director Designate Ratcliffe alluded to this in his opening statement at his Senate confirmation hearings. But talent is where everything starts. And the IC needs to build the AI-ready workforce of the future. And so we have some recommendations in that area as well.
Excellent. You mentioned AI and living at the time when we call it the age of AI. How do you think AI is going to affect the business of intelligence?
In really profound ways. Again, both as a target and a tool, to borrow Mr. Ratcliffe's phrasing. But look, I think the intelligence community has three essential missions when it comes to AI. The first and foremost is we need to understand what our foreign adversaries are developing and how they intend to use
Absolutely.
them. That's mission number one. Mission number two is we're very soon going to have national security AIs of our own. There'll be the intelligence community at the Department of Defense, and these systems will be essential, and they'll need to be protected and defended. So we'll need, as an intelligence community, to lead and help inform the process for developing a defense in depth for our AIs. The last area is the intelligence community needs to begin using these systems. And they're already experimenting with it, but we think this needs to be accelerated to a much greater extent. When I started as an analyst 34 years ago, I would cry into my beer that I had 100 reports to read every morning.
Right.
By the time I retired, my analysts had thousands upon thousands of reports to sift through every day on whatever account they were working on.
Right. And not just classified. I mean,
Not
this
just
includes
classified.
everything.
Most of it wasn't.
Right.
Academic experts estimate that the global digital data sphere created more data in just the past 2 years than has been created in the entire human history.
Right.
Going back to stone tablet times. I mean, that's
Insane.
stunning to
It's
think
insane,
about.
yeah.
And as talked about how my analysts at the end of my career had to look at thousands of reports.
Right.
I would still be upset with them because they weren't getting more data from the
Right.
outside world.
Right.
AI, at last, after many decades of struggle with this phenomenon, offers an opportunity for the IC to sift through that information at speed, to find the patterns, illuminate the challenges and the opportunities from this vast sea of information. Right. So it needs to get on it in terms of implementing these AIs. And there's a whole host of things that need to be done to make that possible. They need to condition the data. They need to prevent hallucinations. They need to establish working relations with the developers of these foundational models so that they can get, at an affordable price,
Right.
Capable systems and keep them updated.
I mean, you mentioned the amount of information that every analyst has to handle today. A while ago, you and one of our colleagues wrote an incredible Substack, just depicting a life in a day of an analyst. If he goes to a workplace and he now has these capabilities at his desk or her desk, and how would that look like? So can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's not a science fiction type of Substack newsletter we published, but I think it provides you with a picture of how that world will look like today if you had these capabilities at your desk?
Happy to talk about it. And first, let me give credit to Tara,
Yeah.
who is my
Yeah,
colleague,
absolutely,
who
yeah.
had the idea to do this
Yeah.
in the first place. SCSP does a marvelous job of hiring really bright and energetic young people, and she's one of them. And she came up with this
Absolutely,
idea,
yeah.
and we did it together. Look, I think some of the intelligence community have believed some of the hype about AI and are running around fearful that analysts are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence machines. I think the reality is far different from that. I think analysts, serious analytic leaders in the IC should be thinking about how to blend their workforce with the new machine capabilities that are coming online, human-machine teams for analysis. And the way that AI is going to make a difference isn't in just, hit the button and get the PDB spit out, but think about the different phases of the analytic process. Everything from kind of making sense of the world, collecting information, where AI, as I mentioned earlier, can sift through enormous amounts of data at speed, spot patterns, alert analysts to anomalies. That's search and discovery is the first area where I think AI can make a big difference. The second phase in an analyst's work then is to think about, well, I've detected an anomaly, or I think I've got the beginning of an insight, but I need to refine my ideas. And again, AI can be a helpful assistant in helping a group or a single analyst think about the different possibilities, think creatively about the implications of this new discovery that they've got, and refine their tradecraft in preparing some sort of report or briefing. Now, the other area is towards the back end. Right now, the intelligence community, and I was one of these people, spends a lot of time editing and checking the work of analysts. AI can do that very rapidly to make sure it conforms to IC analytic standards, obviously is grammatically correct and factually accurate. That can be done much faster. And analysts can then interact with their AIs over the course of their career to kind of learn how they're doing, right? Think about what some private sector companies are doing in the realm of education, where they're creating AI tutors for kids, for students. The same thing could be done for intelligence analysts, and for their managers to say, this is the type of work that you're doing really well. Your writing needs some improvements in these areas, and you probably should be developing some skills in these other topics or issues. These are just some of the ways I think AI can make a difference.
No, incredible. And for those of you that have not seen the Substack newsletter produced by you and Tara, I highly recommend to read it. Going back to the memo, Chip, just let's us focus on a couple of main recommendations you have.
Yep.
You talked a lot about the IC's interaction with the private sector.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate more? What can we do there? This has been a conversation about public-private partnership for many, many years. Why is it now different, and what can we do about it?
Okay, I'm going to highlight a couple of things, picking from a couple of different recommendations on our memos, jumping around a bit. But let's take open source intelligence. We've talked about how the data sphere is exploding. If you're inside the intelligence community, it is, I'll tell you, impossible for you to understand what is available today in the realm of commercially available data. Because you live in a classified environment.
Right. You're isolated, basically.
Right, you're
from the real
isolated,
world,
and you need to be, right? The intelligence community needs to recognize that and adapt a new approach, a public-private partnership for acquiring the best-in-breed commercially available data.
Right.
There's a pilot project that is already underway at our urging that is showing that this approach can really pay dividends. First, it absolves the IC of the responsibility of understanding this marketplace, deferring to experts who sit on the outside.
Right.
All right. But understand the intelligence community's needs and requirements, and then interact with that marketplace to bring on board within a consortium those companies with the best data that the IC needs.
Right.
And the marginal cost of adding another IC user or another IC unit to getting information related to, say, Chinese companies is lower. Right now, you can imagine, 18 agencies in the IC all
Right.
interested in China tech.
Right.
Every time they go to one of these vendors, they're charged full freight. Well, this is an enormous cost burden for the taxpayer, and this consortium would allow the IC to drive down costs. And for the private sector, the benefit is it provides a clear path to getting their data to the intelligence community. How the IC onboards AI and these other new technologies must accelerate. It needs to happen much faster. Why? Because the pace of technological development is advancing so quickly. There has been a lot of ink spilled and a lot of great ideas put forward about how the intelligence community and the Defense Department can accelerate these processes.
Right.
What we're saying is it's a matter of leadership. The new DNI, the new DCIA, and set of IC leaders need to insist that these really good ideas, such as other transactional authority, be implemented, and that their R&D and their S&T staffs need to increase the percentage of new technologies that they're bringing on board from some of these smaller companies, which are the real sources of innovation and not just the prime contractors.
Right.
Those are just a couple of ways.
Another big recommendations we have in your memo is the open source center. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know. Look, I mean, you and I know our intel agencies recognize this. I mean, it's not that they don't recognize the power of open source nowadays. Some of them have made huge progress even in establishing offices and centers and allocating people.
Yeah.
But what can they do more? And why do you think we need to do more?
Open source has been a feature of the U.S. intelligence community since its founding.
Since the beginning, yeah, exactly.
It is not new. But it is de-emphasized, and it's under-resourced. The number of people across the intelligence community that are facing this enormous data sphere of openly, commercially available information is less than a tenth of what is dedicated to analyzing imagery.
Right.
Even less against what is collected on signals intelligence, which account for far less data, right? So the disparity is stark. And I mentioned before that OSINT, open source information, is essential if we're going to be making use of AI and making sense of this techno-economic landscape. Right now, within the intelligence community, CIA is the executive agent for OSINT.
Right.
And I love my former agency, but I have
We
to
all do.
say
We all do too.
that the focus for CIA has been and should remain human intelligence and all source intelligence.
Their bread
So
and
I
butter.
think, so I think the mission should be lifted out of CIA and moved to the DNI, centrally located, on par with the National Counterterrorism Center and the other national centers that the ODNI sponsors. And it should be fully resourced and expanded. And that, I think, would give it a place at the table, a shot at getting more resources, and impact across the community.
Your memo also talks about helping the president push back against the threats. What did you mean by that?
Okay. So let me say at the outset that covert action has and it very much should remain the purview of the president. This is a policy decision whether the United States engages in covert action. But the intelligence community, particularly CIA, has a responsibility for building and maintaining capabilities to offer the president in times of need.
Right.
And when called upon, to offer ideas and suggestions. You know, if you think back to 9/11, it was George Tenet who went to President Bush with the initial war plan
Right.
to how to attack Taliban and Al-Qaeda. After the October attacks against Israel, it was Mossad's director that went to their prime minister with a daring plan to use pagers to disrupt Hezbollah,
Right.
right? Again, the policy committee sets the objectives and the direction, but this country is receiving daily, hourly attacks from our adversaries in the cyber realm,
Right.
in the ransomware realm,
Right.
in the misinformation and disinformation realm. And our intelligence community needs to put itself in sort of a war footing, a war mentality, and lean forward to offer policymakers options and ideas and creativity to implement covert action when called upon. Because, as the Israelis demonstrated against Hezbollah, those actions can be decisive.
Yeah, creative
strategically.
ideas, yeah. Last point in your memo, which is not the least important, is really the issue of the workforce. I mean, you talked a little bit about that, the future of the human-machine collaboration. What do you think the IC should do now to, rescale and retrain the labor for the future that's coming?
Yeah. So in addition to partnering more closely with the private sector, it also needs to think about how it's going to amp up the skills and qualifications of its own workforce. It starts with recruitment.
Right.
Now, right now, as everybody knows, if you want to join the intelligence community, you have to go through a lengthy and thorough security
Background
process,
investigation,
right?
yeah.
Necessarily so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? It's important. When it comes to attracting tech talent into the IC, there needs to be a bit of a shift from just a focus on weaning out candidates because they don't meet security requirements or what have you, to more of a wooing posture. We need to actively be going out and finding these people and giving them reasons to even apply to the IC. And when they do, they should be bumped to the front of the line for security processing. I'm not saying do away with that processing altogether, but if I've got a candidate with AI skills, I think that person should probably be ahead of someone like me,
Right.
with just with the poli-sci background.
Right.
Okay, that's one. The second thing is we need to be building relationships with the very universities and academic institutions that the Chinese are. Right? They send their young students to Caltech, to MIT, to Stanford. The IC has some relationships and recruitment efforts there, but it needs to be much more emphasized, right? To attract people into the world of intelligence. And we're never going to compete with the private sector in terms of salaries, but we do offer something that the private sector doesn't, and that's an opportunity to serve the country and work on something meaningful. So if these people do decide to join the IC and they get through the security clearance, they should immediately put to work on the top issues, not relegated to the back benches to put in years of apprenticeship, but immediately put to work on top issues.
Right.
And as inevitably the case, these really bright young engineers and software designers are going to eventually leave to start their own companies or go work for the private sector. And when they do, the IC should lean forward in finding ways to keep them on contract, to maintain their clearances, invite them back from time to time to help consult on these net assessments that they should be doing on emerging tech and recommending things that the IC should be doing to improve its business processes.
Now, you talked a lot about the recruitment. You're a lecturer at University of Maryland as well. So, what is your one recommendation of why people should join, CIA for that matter, or any other intel agency that we have? Because I'm sure, graduate students around the country debate whether or not they should move to DC. Why should I join CIA? It's long, it's classified. I will not be able to tell anybody what I'm doing. When we live at the age where, our lives are all on social media, But why is it important to come and work for something so meaningful?
So we've spent a lot of time in this podcast kind of criticizing the IC and talking about what it needs to do better. But for the young people out there, I would say nothing can replace the mission. What the intelligence community does is absolutely vital to the country's security. And working in the IC gives you unprecedented access, not only to data and information, which nobody else in the world has, but also decision makers and an opportunity to shape and influence how the president and senior advisors think about and understand the world. Nothing can replicate the feeling of being a young CIA analyst sitting in the Oval Office briefing the President of the United States. It's absolutely irreplaceable, and I would encourage anybody with technical background or interest in international affairs to consider the intelligence committee.
Thank you, Chip. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, for your service. I think your last sentence about briefing the president serves well with the title of our podcast, Memos to the President, and the latest one authored by you on the intelligence community's need to reform for the age of AI. Thank you again. And for those of you listening or watching, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.